Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Welcome back. Do I need to turn the volume up on this mic? No? Okay. This is Geography 130. It's lecture 8. We are going to spend at least half lecture finishing up lecture 7, though. I apologize. It's so hot I had to take off my other shirt, so I have to lecture in a t-shirt today. All right. Are all the enrollment issues resolved? Right? You're all in the class now, right? There's nobody on the wait list anymore? Good. It just barely worked out. And I should add that it worked out in part due to the willingness of the GSIs to take on more students than the class officially is supposed to have in it. So if you feel like giving your GSIs an apple or something, you should do so. Today we're going to talk about Adam Smith. We're going to finish talking about Adam Smith, and we're going to talk about Karl Marx. And in many ways, this represents the core or the foundational set of theoretical frameworks that we are going to use in this course. Okay? If you take Malthus, and you take Adam Smith, and you take Karl Marx, you have three ways of thinking about the relationship of human populations and natural resources that are overlapping but distinct. And in many ways, if you look at the theories that people use today to think about these issues, in almost every case, I think, you can identify today's positions and arguments as one or the other of these three frameworks, as still relying on these three frameworks, even if they are 150, 200, even more than that years old. Okay? So if you want to try to focus your attention on the sort of conceptual and theoretical issues that matter for the purposes of this semester, this is where you should start. And I realize I haven't asked you to read very much Malthus or very much Smith or very much Marx. In each case, there are plenty of further readings that you might pursue to get a fuller sense of these theories. But I have tried to condense them into coherent, to the extent that they consider themselves coherent anyway, articulated frameworks for thinking about these issues. Okay? So I encourage you to think carefully about how they resemble each other, what they have in common, and how they differ from each other. In many ways, if you take Adam Smith and you say, here's his framework, Malthus overlaps Smith in one direction, Marx overlaps Smith in another direction. There's very little overlap between Marx and Malthus, but they do have common ground in Smith. So last time, I only just got started talking about Adam Smith and his Wealth of Nations. If you remember, he suggested that the prosperity or wealth of nations is a function of the division of labor. And we had just gotten into a discussion about what the division of labor is. We talked about the pin factory. We suggested that the division of labor is limited by the extent of the market. Very simply, how readily can you obtain your needs by exchange? And that doesn't just mean buying and selling stuff. It also means buying and selling your own labor power, right? And these limits can be drawn geographically. You might say, in some cases, the limits of a market for exchange are bounded by a nation or a state or a region or even the area around a village or something like that. There's also other ways of thinking about it, however, sort of how intensively does the market mediate what you do with a given day, right? How many of your activities are market mediated versus otherwise mediated? And by that I mean, do you grow your own food or do you buy your food? Do you make your own clothes or do you buy your clothes? Do you find ways of entertaining yourself that don't involve spending money, or do you pretty much spend money for everything you do, whether it's work or play? That might be considered sort of the intensiveness or intensity of a market in a given setting. These are both ways of thinking about the limits of the division of labor. Smith suggests that a civilized commercial society is one in which everyone, to some extent or another, is engaged in a kind of commerce, a kind of exchanging of goods and services. And this is the kind of society that he was observing and trying to make sense of during his own lifetime in the latter part of the 18th century. Okay? Now, Smith notes that in order for the division of labor to develop very much, money has to come into generalized use. And we can perhaps imagine a society in which there is generalized exchange but no money. In theory, we could all barter for everything we need, right? But in actual practice, that is virtually unheard of, right? If exchange is going to become the general way in which people get the things that they need, money is a sort of historical necessity. There has to be some kind of token that people can use to buy and sell things. Now, it can be any number of things, right? It doesn't have to be pieces of paper with pictures of presidents on them and little coins. It can be shells. It can be pieces of bone that have been carved in certain ways. It can be things like peppercorns. As long as they're fairly stable and fairly easily counted, measured, that kind of thing, they can function as money and probably have functioned as money at some point in time, in some place. The kind of money that we're concerned about, more the kind that we're accustomed to now, with a key difference. In Smith's time, money was almost exclusively some kind of valuable metal. Gold, silver, copper were the key ones in his time, right? And he talks about the money supply and how these different media, different kinds of metal, interact with each other and interact with prices, right? What are some of the things he raises as sort of common problems or concerns in a society in which money is gold or silver? Yeah.
A lack of standardization, like weight.
Okay. A lack of standardization. Typically, yeah, go ahead.
The quality of material being adulterated.
Okay. The issue of debasing currency. What does it mean to debase a currency? Do you know? The first issue is standardization. Presumably, if you have two coins that are supposed to represent the same amount of money, then they should be the same weight. If they're not the same weight, then you've got this problem. It says it's worth a pound or a guinea. That's what it's supposed to be worth. But if they aren't all the same weight, the actual measure of value is the weight of those coins. And if you have to stop and weigh each and every one of them very carefully to see if it really is in fact the right weight, you're going to have all kinds of problems actually making exchanges, right? And this is a very widespread phenomenon in markets in Smith's day and in parts of the world to this day. There's an issue of actually evaluating the quality of each piece of currency that you are engaging with. And it's not just a question of weight. It can also be a question of the purity of the coin, right? To debase a currency is to adulterate it in some fashion. You melt down a bunch of silver, and then you add some less valuable metal to the mix, and then you mint your coins. So that instead of being pure sterling silver, each coin is maybe only 90% silver and 10% something else. It's not worth as much. Who would want to do this? Why would you be anybody minting a currency? The mint, the state, the government. They can produce more apparent currency with the same amount of silver or gold. They can actually, in a sense, invent money out of thin air. It's like counterfeiting, right? And this is actually an extremely widespread and persistent problem in the development of money in most of the world, looking at it historically. Every time you make an exchange, you are essentially placing some kind of faith in whoever made that money and whoever's handled it since then, that it is in fact what it purports to be, that it really is sterling silver of a certain weight. We don't think about this very much anymore because with dollar bills, it seems like the problem has been solved, right? Insofar as it's not subject to counterfeiting. But if the actual sort of basis of the value of the currency is the metal, then the quality and weight of each piece of money matters a great deal. And you have to think about a time when, if you had a whole bunch of gold coin, no, I'm sorry, put it this way, if you had a bunch of gold jewelry, and you didn't care to have the jewelry anymore and you really wanted the money, you could take it to the government and hand it to them and ask that it be melted down and converted to coins, right? Or that you be given an equivalent amount of gold in coins. It's almost as though you had your choice about whether you wanted this to be jewelry or wanted it to be money. Because money was simply an expression, a form of manifestation of the value of the underlying metal. Okay? And it may be that your eyes glazed over in some of those passages from Smith where he's carrying on and on and on about this, right? And you're like, who cares anymore? Well, at the time, it mattered a great deal. And it opens up a number of questions that are important to the larger discussion we're having now. And I want to get into that now. In any case, does anybody know what seigniorage is? Can't let the term go by on a slide without at least mentioning it. No economics majors here? Really? Seigniorage is a technical term. It is, whoever it is who gets to make money has actually got a little increment of what looks like profit that they can take from the making of the money itself. And that's what seigniorage refers to. The power of the mint to make money conveys with it a certain economic benefit. It's rather technical and perhaps not worth getting into right now, but it's just that's what this is referring to, and that's also part of the discussion that Smith provides in the passages I asked you to read. Okay, so what does this get? Where does this get us? Why is this important? For Smith, he cares about this precisely because it indicates two very different meanings of value in a commercial society. Just as the value of a coin has a money expression, so many pounds sterling, so many guineas, so many dollars, it also simultaneously has an expression in gold or silver under a system such as this. And I should note up right now, we no longer use this system ourselves, okay? When did we give it up? 1971, is it 71, 72? Right about in there. 71, you're probably right. You probably looked at it more recently than I have. Very recently, we still had this system. And the way it worked was there was a certain amount of gold sitting in the vaults of the US federal government. And that gold backed the value of all the dollars in circulation. Every single dollar in circulation was, in theory, exchangeable for a certain amount of gold. And the solvency or the value, the sort of currency of last resort was in fact gold, even though everyone did everything in dollars. And what that meant was that if everybody simultaneously went to the federal government and said, we don't want dollars anymore, we want gold, the Fed, in theory, could in fact give everybody a certain amount of gold for each dollar that they handed in. We went off that system under President Nixon, and it's no longer the case. And that opens up a whole other set of questions which are interesting but are not our focus here today. Okay? Any questions? So Smith writes, value has two different meanings and sometimes expresses the utility of some particular object and sometimes the power of purchasing other goods which the possession of that object conveys. So we can talk about the value of a hammer as its utility, what you can do with it. It has value because you can pound nails in with it or break up concrete or whatever. That's its value in use. It also has value in exchange insofar as it represents a certain amount of money. And he's saying you can purchase other goods with that amount of money. The value that that hammer represents in money is, in theory, equivalent to a certain amount of other goods, whatever they may be. You can sort of translate from one good to another via this language of money, prices. Okay? The value of any commodity, therefore, to the person who possesses it and who means to exchange it for other commodities is equal to the quantity of labor which it enables him to purchase or command. Labor, therefore, is the real measure of the exchangeable value of all commodities. So, look at that hammer. You think it's worth $15.95? Well, Smith says, no, that $15.95 is just a sort of language. It expresses in money terms a certain amount of labor that went into producing that hammer. And in theory, that's equivalent to the amount of labor that would go into producing $15.95 worth of anything else. The hammer is therefore equivalent to 3 boxes of cornflakes or 1 t-shirt, that kind of thing, because they have the same price. And that price reflects the labor used to produce those different goods. And therefore, ultimately, labor is what exchangeable value reflects. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay, you're right. A hammer you can use again and again and again and again. Box of cornflakes, you eat them and they're gone. True. For purposes of that moment of exchange, that is not a consideration, right? It's all that matters at the moment of exchange is that the two reflect or represent equivalent amounts of labor. Yeah. If you don't have the cornflakes, you won't be able to wield that hammer very effectively. Yes? Yeah.
Also, is this theory more difficult in modern day with like advertising and everything because of branding, where
Right.
products that were made pretty much for similar costs are
Right.
way different.
Right. It's very difficult to actually go look at the price of something and then figure out exactly how much labor went into producing it and then decide and then demonstrate somehow that the amount of labor in the two are in fact somehow the same. Right? You know, one person spends 3 hours making a piece of computer code and gets paid $10,000 for it. Another person spends 3 hours wielding a hammer and gets paid $10. So they each have 3 hours of labor, but they have dramatically different prices. How do you make sense of that? Well, then you guys start talking about, well, what did it take to make the labor power that produced those two things in the same amount of time? And we're going to get into these things right now, these very types of questions. So how can value be measured? As we've already seen in this brief discussion, it's not a simple question. The real price of everything, what everything really costs to the man who wants to acquire it, is the toil and trouble of acquiring it. In theory, you get to decide, right? You want a hammer. Would you rather somehow make it yourself, or would you rather go buy one? Right there, you're sort of facing the very question. How do you measure the value of your time against the value of the dollars in your pocket, which you can spend, but once you've spent them, you can't very easily get them back and spend them on something else, right? How do we find some kind of equivalency between time spent working, toil and trouble, and money? Ultimately, what Smith is going to say, and Marx will drive this point much further, is that value and price are radically different things. They may sometimes intersect or align with each other, but they are not the same thing. You cannot read value in a simple way off of price. He says the higgling and bargaining of the market actually sets prices, according to that sort of rough equality which, though not exact, is sufficient for carrying on the business of common life. Right? Supply and demand affect the prices at which goods exchange. Right? And this is the higgling and bargaining of the market. It can change all the time. It's subject to all kinds of weird circumstances. Right? Suddenly there's enhanced demand. You know, there's a hurricane coming, so suddenly plywood is worth 4 times as much as it was yesterday. That's higgling and bargaining in the market. Prices go all over the place, right? Even though the amount of labor that went into producing that plywood has not changed at all. It was the same yesterday as it is today. So the market can set prices off in all kinds of different directions, which seem to be separated or at least somehow decoupled from value as labor. The quantity of labor, he says, is an abstract notion, which, though it can be made sufficiently intelligible, is not altogether so natural and obvious. And remember, he's writing at a time when the market, in the modern form, is a relatively new phenomenon. And people are still struggling to make sense of it. And he's suggesting that in order to make sense of the market, we have to have this concept of value that underlies the prices, but at the same time is not actually in any simple way reflected in prices. And this is sort of a conceptual leap that I have to ask you simply to make and hope that, given enough time to sort of fill in the pieces, it will actually end up making sense. But at the outset here, I will admit, it's, like he says, an abstract notion that I will try to make sufficiently intelligible, but it may remain a little bit unnatural or not obvious to you for the time being. So here's one way of trying to make sense of it or explain it that shouldn't be too hard to understand, and that's the distinction between real and nominal prices. And Smith goes into this at some length. In a commercial society, money becomes the measure of exchange value, but money itself is subject to changes in its own value. And this is due not only to problems of debasing currencies, right? If it becomes generally known that the currency of a given nation has been debased, what happens? Prices go up. Anybody who expects to get £5 sterling for 5 coins suddenly discovers that in fact it takes 6 coins to get that much silver because each coin has been debased. So prices, what was £5 yesterday, is now going to be £6. Prices go up. Money therefore expresses the nominal price, nominal meaning the face value price, but it can never be an accurate measure of the value of other commodities. The real price, the value, the expression in labor, may or may not align with the nominal price. Nominal prices can move up and down either because of supply and demand for the good itself, like the plywood, or because of the value of the underlying currency, which can also go up and down, right? We talk about inflation. If the government doubles the money supply, this is essentially a supply and demand as well. It's a supply and demand for money. If a given government doubles its money supply, the immediate response in the market is to double all the prices of goods. It does not actually get you anywhere apart from that little seigniorage increment that I mentioned a moment ago, but you don't need to worry about that. So perhaps we should think of this not so much as a labor theory of value, but as a value theory of labor. Certain kinds of labor produce value in this kind of society that we're talking about. Equal quantities of labor at all times and places may be said to be of equal value to the laborer. Everybody's hour of work is of equal value to him or her. Labor alone, therefore, is never varying in its own value. Labor alone, therefore, never varying in its own value, is alone the ultimate and real standard by which the value of all commodities can at all times and places be estimated and compared. It is their real price. Money is their nominal price only. And again, this is the theory of value that Karl Marx is going to use himself. We like to think of Marx and Smith, or conventionally we think of Marx and Smith as diametrically opposed, right? One is the spokesperson of capitalism, the other is the spokesperson of communism.